The following Appalachian Mountains horror stories are real, disturbing, and should be used as warnings. The names and locations have been altered to protect the individuals involved. Viewer discretion is advised. If you are ever driving through the Kentucky mountains, you might think the winding roads and deep forests are the perfect place for a family vacation. But when a violent tornado forced Grant and his family to take cover in a remote cabin, they heard a wet, rhythmic thumping coming from directly beneath the floorboards. He was about to find out that the storm raging outside was nothing compared to the nightmare trapped in the house with them. This happened last spring. Grant gripped the steering wheel of the family SUV, a relaxed smile on his face, as country music played on the radio. They were finally doing it. The big family trip to Dollywood down in Pigeon Forge. In the passenger seat, his wife Julia scrolled through pictures of roller coasters, laughing at a video on her phone. In the back seat, 10-year-old Mary buried her nose in a book, and 7-year-old Noah kicked the back of Grant's seat. Thud, thud, thud. Grant didn't even mind the noise. He pictured the cozy cabin they rented and the massive plates of barbecue waiting for them. The stressful part of the year was over. But as they drove down Interstate 75 into southeastern Kentucky, right near the edge of the Daniel Boone National Forest, the sky above the trees curdled into a bruised, sickly shade of green. The radio dissolved into harsh static. Julia tapped her phone screen in frustration. The map vanished, replaced by a stark no-service banner. A massive dark funnel cloud twisted out of the sky right over the distant tree line, churning up a violent wall of dirt. Panic spiked in Grant's chest. He jerked the wheel, veering off the highway onto a crumbling mountain back road to find a sturdy building. Towering pines pressed tight against the shoulder, swallowing the SUV in deep shadows. They rolled into a tiny pocket neighborhood, a row of gray, weathered shacks spaced exactly 100 yards apart from each other. Grant stomped on the brakes. Gravel crunched under the tires. His heart slowed its hammering against his ribs. They found shelter. But as the wind roared over the hood of the car, Grant stared at the nearest house, and his mouth went completely dry. Thick wooden planks covered every single window, but the iron nails were hammered into the outside. "Everybody out! Run for the house!" Grant yelled over the screaming wind. He shoved his car door open. The freezing rain slammed into his face like tiny needles. He grabbed his daughter's hand, his chest heaving up and down. A cold, thick sweat dripped down the back of his neck, mixing with the rain. "I just need to get them behind a solid wall," he thought, his brain locked into survival mode. Just get them inside. He sprinted across the overgrown yard, his boots crunching violently against the gravel. A harsh, metallic smell, like wet pennies and old iron, filled his nose. But as his boot hit the tall grass, his toe hooked on something heavy. He stumbled hard, his hands scraping the wet ground. He looked down. A massive, rusted iron chain laid hidden in the weeds. It was bolted directly into the house's concrete foundation, trailed across the entire 100-yard yard, and hooked straight into the neighbor's house. Why would anyone chain a house to the ground? Grant thought. Thick goosebumps erupted all over his bare arms. He glanced up toward the dirt road. A line of mailboxes stood in the storm. Every single one was painted flat, matte black. No names, no numbers. Just one deep hand-carved notch on the side of each wooden post. Blind panic spiked in Grant's chest. He dragged his family up the sagging wooden steps of the nearest house and pounded his wet fist against the front door. Bang! Bang! Before his fist could hit the wood a third time, the heavy door violently groaned open. An old woman stood in the pitch-black hallway. Her pale skin was pulled incredibly tight over her cheekbones, looking exactly like dry parchment paper. She stepped backward into the shadows, gesturing for them to come inside. Grant shoved his kids through the doorway and gasped for air. His heart hammered wildly against his ribs. Thank God, his mind repeated. We made it. We are safe. But as he rushed past her into the hallway, he stopped dead in his tracks. The woman wasn't looking at his family. Her wide, unblinking eyes were locked dead onto the empty 100-yard gap they had just run across, and her pale lips were moving rapidly in a silent, frantic count. Grant slammed the heavy front door shut, instantly cutting off the deafening roar of the tornado. The sudden, dead silence inside the dark hallway was suffocating. He gasped for breath, but the air inside the house tasted foul, like a thick mixture of wet wool and old, rusty copper pennies. A violent shiver ripped down his spine. What kind of place did we just walk into, he thought, his chest heaving as he wiped cold sweat from his forehead. He ushered his family out of the hall and into the kitchen. A single, flickering oil lantern sat on the table. Julia immediately gasped, pulling the kids tight against her legs and hiding their faces in her coat. Grant's jaw locked tight. Wooden shelves lined every single inch of the kitchen walls, packed entirely with hundreds of dirty glass mason jars. They weren't filled with peaches. Some held dozens of yellowed human teeth. Others contained thick tufts of coarse black hair and pale, knotted umbilical cords suspended in cloudy liquid. In the far corner, tiny, handmade corn husk dolls were propped up on top of miniature, infant-sized wooden caskets. Grant backed up, bumping directly into the old woman. He turned around and got a good look at her in the lantern light, and his stomach twisted into a hard, sick knot. She wore a filthy, oversized flannel shirt tucked into thick canvas overalls that were coated in dark, rusted stains. Her stringy gray hair hung in greasy clumps around a face that looked like deeply cracked leather. She didn't look frail. She looked hardened, like she had spent 70 years chopping wood and digging holes in the dead of night. Her eyes were cloudy, completely dead, and completely unfazed by the storm outside. She smelled intensely of damp earth and rotting meat. "This isn't a house!" Grant's brain screamed at him. "It's a slaughterhouse." The woman didn't say a single word. She just slowly raised a thick, calloused hand, her knuckles badly swollen with arthritis, and pointed her long, dirt-caked fingernail directly at the center of the linoleum floor. Sitting flat on the ground was a heavy wooden hatch with a rusted iron ring. The house violently groaned around them as the wind picked back up. Grant knew they had to get underground right now. He rushed over, dropped to his knees, and wrapped his sweaty fingers around the cold iron ring. But right as his muscles tensed to pull the door open, a heavy, wet thud violently slammed against the underside of the wood, stopping him dead in his tracks. The entire house violently shuddered. A massive drop in air pressure sucked the oxygen right out of the kitchen, popping Grant's ears with a sharp, painful crack. Outside, the wind no longer sounded like air. It sounded exactly like a massive freight train grinding off its tracks right over their heads. 10-year-old Mary started screaming, clamping her hands over her ears. 7-year-old Noah buried his face in Julia's coat, sobbing uncontrollably as bright red blood began pouring out of his nose from the pressure change. Julia dropped to her knees, wrapping her arms tightly around both kids, her eyes wide and pleading as she looked up at Grant. "I have to get them underground," Grant thought. A cold, heavy sweat stung his eyes. His heart hammered so hard against his ribs it physically hurt. He was the dad. He had to fix this. He lunged forward, grabbed the rusted iron ring on the cellar door, and yanked upward. Instantly, a thunderous, inhuman barking erupted from the pitch-black space below. It wasn't a dog. It was too heavy, too vicious. Something massive slammed into the underside of the floorboards, blasting sharp splinters of wood into the air. Grant fell backward onto the linoleum, his blood running completely ice-cold. The vicious barking dissolved into a thick, wet, gurgling noise. It sounded like a throat that was absolutely not built for human speech, desperately trying to scream, "Mama! Mama!" The noise in the room was pure chaos. The roof groaned, the kids wailed, and the basement door violently rattled. "What is down there?" Grant yelled, scrambling to his feet and putting his body between the vibrating trap door and his family. The old woman didn't answer. She simply picked up the rusted double-barrel shotgun from the refrigerator. With a loud, heavy clack, she cocked the hammers back and leveled the dark metal barrels directly at Grant's chest. Her cloudy eyes were wide, completely glassy, and totally unfazed by the tornado tearing her porch apart. "That's the cellar's keep," she croaked, her voice sounding like grinding stones. She gestured the gun barrel toward the rattling floor. "You stay up here with the wind, or you go down there with the kin. You don't get both." Grant froze. His muscles tightly locked. The metallic taste of raw adrenaline flooded the back of his throat. He looked at the shotgun, then at his crying kids, and then down at the shaking trapdoor. "I have to choose," his brain screamed. "Get crushed by the storm or get eaten in the dark." He squeezed his eyes shut, reached down, and wrapped his shaking fingers around the iron ring again, ready to pull it open and take his chances in the dark. But right at that exact second, the deafening roar of the freight train vanished. The violent shaking of the walls completely stopped. The sudden dead silence in the kitchen was so heavy it made Grant dizzy. The tornado had passed over them just as fast as it had arrived. Only the wet, rhythmic scratching beneath the floorboards remained. The old woman slowly lowered the shotgun. She stared at Grant with a cold, completely dead expression and pointed her bony finger toward the front hallway. "The wind is gone," she whispered. "Get out." The storm vanished just as violently as it had arrived, leaving behind a dead, heavy silence and the sharp, burning smell of ozone. Grant didn't say a single word. He just grabbed his family, rushed them back to the SUV, and drove out of that hollow as fast as the tires could spin. Believe it or not, they actually made it to Dollywood. Grant forced a massive, fake smile for the rest of the week, buying funnel cakes and riding roller coasters so the kids would forget the nightmare. It worked for Mary and Noah. They completely brushed it off. But Grant and Julia were completely shook, jumping at every loud noise and locking every deadbolt in their hotel room twice. Every night in that bed, Grant stared at the ceiling, his brain desperately trying to troubleshoot what the hell they had just walked into. What was making that wet, gurgling mama noise under the floorboards? And what were those massive rusted chains out in the yard actually for? Were the houses tethered together because they shared one massive connected dirt basement? Was there an entire network of tunnels down there, hiding some forgotten inbred family that the neighborhood was secretly feeding during storms? Grant never got an answer, but his stomach twisted into a hard knot every time he realized they were just seconds away from finding out. And guys, if you think a hidden, mutated family sounds too crazy to be real, you have to understand how isolated these deep Appalachian pockets truly are. It's not just scary campfire fiction. It's a biological reality called the founder effect. When a small group of people settles in a remote mountain hollow, the 1,000-foot ridges can physically trap their DNA in the exact same 100-yard area for centuries. The statistics show that 19th-century cousin marriage rates in these mountains weren't actually much higher than on other rural farms across the world. The terrifying difference was the geography. The mountains never let anyone in, and they never let anyone out, meaning those specific rare genes just kept feeding on themselves for over 200 years. For example, starting in 1820, a man named Martin Fugate settled in Kentucky's Troublesome Creek. He carried a super-rare recessive gene for a condition called methemoglobinemia. Because his community was completely cut off from the rest of the world, family members intermarried for over 150 years. This genetic bottleneck caused their blood to lose its oxygen-carrying capacity, turning their skin a literal bright indigo blue. Some descendants were so blue, they were described by doctors as being the color of a bruised plum, and the last blue baby in that line was born as recently as 1975. So, if you ever find yourself lost on a mountain back road, remember, the geographic isolation isn't the scariest part. The scariest part is what happens in the dark when the DNA in those hollows is left alone long enough to build something completely different. A father and son hiked into North Carolina's Pisgah National Forest to scatter a loved one's ashes at a remote mountain overlook. They signed no trail register, told no one their exact location, and when they encountered a friendly ranger at Deep Gap offering water and advice, they had no idea they'd just walked into a trap set by a man who'd done this before. This happened 2 weeks ago, on a random Saturday in late May, to a high school shop teacher named Robert Marsh and his son Casey. Robert was 42 years old, and for the last 8 months, he'd been a widower. His wife Linda died from ovarian cancer the previous September, and her final wish, written in her journal 3 days before hospice, was specific: "Scatter me at Black Balsam Knob, where we honeymooned in '99. Robert had already postponed the trip twice. Once in October, because he couldn't get out of bed. Once in March, because he broke down sobbing in the REI parking lot and drove home. But this time, his son Casey, 19, home from Virginia Tech for the summer, basically forced him into the car at 5 a.m. with a packed day pack and a brass urn wrapped in a towel. Now it was 11 a.m., and they were 4 hours into the Art Loeb Trail in North Carolina's Pisgah National Forest, and Robert's knees were absolutely destroyed. "Dad, you good?" Casey asked, glancing back. Robert nodded, but he wasn't good. Old wrestling injury from high school. His left knee felt like someone was grinding glass into the joint with every step. They'd only covered 3 of the 6 miles to Black Balsam Knob, and the forecast showed heavy storms rolling in tomorrow. If they didn't do this today, Robert didn't know if he'd ever have the guts to try again. Casey checked his phone. 8% battery, no signal. He'd burned through the charge taking photos earlier, trying to keep things light, trying to keep his dad distracted. The trail had been weirdly empty for a Saturday in May. They'd seen a couple day hikers descending around 9 a.m., but no one since. Just endless green tunnel of rhododendron and the occasional wooden trail marker nailed to a tree. When they reached Deep Gap, a legitimate saddle point where the trail dipped between 2 ridges, Robert stopped to catch his breath. And that's when they saw him. A man in what looked like an official National Forest Service uniform, leaning against a weathered trail sign, smoking a cigarette. The ranger looked up, smiled, and said, "You 2 lost?" But his eyes weren't on their faces. They were locked on the urn in Robert's day pack. The ranger pushed off the trail sign and walked toward them with his hand extended. "Name's Pike, backcountry ranger, doing some trail maintenance up here." Robert shook his hand out of reflex. Pike's grip was too firm, held a half-second too long. "Robert Marsh. This is my son, Casey." Pike nodded, pulling a dented Nalgene from his belt. "You boys need water? It's a hot one today." "We're good, thanks," Casey said. Something about the guy made his shoulders tense up. The same gut instinct he got in the gym when someone was about to cheap shot him during pickup basketball. Pike's eyes drifted back to Robert's pack. "Where you headed?" "Black Balsam Knob," Robert said. About 3 more miles north, right? Pike's smile tightened. Just a flicker, but Robert caught it. Just the two of you? Pike asked. Yeah, Robert said slowly. Anyone know you're out here? The question landed weird. Not friendly weird, wrong weird. Casey jumped in. My girlfriend knows. She's meeting us at the trailhead tomorrow. It was a lie, but something told him to say it. Pike's jaw worked like he was chewing the inside of his cheek. You signed the trail register at Ivester Gap? Robert shook his head. We were running late, didn't stop. Pike smiled again. Figures, most folks skip it. That's when Casey noticed the uniform. His roommate at Virginia Tech was a forestry major. Casey had seen real USFS Rangers a dozen times on campus. The green on Pike's shirt was off, too dark. The patches didn't sit right. And the radio clipped to his belt looked like something from the 1980s, all scuffed plastic and a coiled cord. Static crackled from the radio. Pike's hand shot down and shut it off. Fast. So what's in the urn? Pike asked, nodding at Robert's pack. Robert hesitated, then figured honesty was safer. My wife's ashes. We're spreading them at Black Balsam. It was her final wish. Pike's face went hard, flat. Can't let you do that. Robert blinked. Excuse me. Federal law, 36 CFR 2.62. Disposal of human remains on public land without a permit. Pike pulled a folded paper from his chest pocket, photocopied, creased, looked homemade. $500 fine, possible arrest. Casey stepped forward, keeping his voice polite. Actually, sir, scattering ashes is allowed in national forests with verbal permission. My dad called the ranger district office last week. They said it was fine. Pike took a step closer. 6 inches too close. You talked to Brenda. Yeah, she doesn't handle my section. I handle Deep Gap to Black Balsam. His hand drifted to an expandable baton on his belt, the kind cops carried. And I say no. Robert's gut clenched. The same primal unease he'd felt once when a stranger followed him to his car in a parking garage at night. Every instinct screaming, danger. Casey's eyes flicked past Pike, through the trees. About 200 yards off trail, barely visible through the rhododendron, there was a blue sedan parked on an old Forest Service road. The road had a rusted gate across it, road closed signs from years ago. What was Pike's vehicle doing back there? And why was there a tarp covering something in the back seat? Robert felt his pulse hammering in his throat. Every cell in his body was screaming predator. He forced his voice to stay calm, submissive. You're absolutely right, officer. We didn't mean any trouble. We'll just head back down. Sorry for the confusion. He grabbed Casey's shoulder and turned to leave. Pike's hand clamped onto Robert's bicep. Hard. Hard enough to leave white fingerprints in the skin. Not so fast. Pike's voice had gone flat, empty. I need to confiscate that urn. Evidence of intent to violate federal law. Casey moved before he could think, stepping between Pike and his father, using his full 6'1" frame. His voice cracked. Sir, we're leaving. You can't just take our property without... Without what? Pike's other hand went to the baton. He pulled it out with a metallic snick, extending it to full length. You think I need a warrant out here, college boy? You're 4 miles from anyone who gives a shit about you. No cell service, no witnesses. His eyes were dead, flat, like a shark's. Now hand over the urn and maybe I let you walk out of here. Robert's brain caught up to what his body already knew. This wasn't law enforcement. This was a robbery. Or worse. The urn was brass, maybe worth $200 at a pawn shop. But Pike's hands were shaking slightly. His eyes were too wide, too hungry. Drugs, maybe. desperation, debt. And 2 witnesses on an empty trail were a problem. Robert's hands went up slowly. He pulled the urn from his pack and set it on the ground at Pike's feet. "Take it, please, we're leaving." He grabbed Casey's arm and started walking, fast. Behind them, Pike didn't pick up the urn. He followed, not running, not yelling, just matching their pace. 30 feet back. When Robert sped up, Pike sped up. When Robert glanced over his shoulder, Pike was still there, baton tapping rhythmically against his thigh. Tap, tap, tap. The trail narrowed into a nightmare of rhododendron, 8-foot-tall tangles pressing in from both sides, impossible to bushwhack through. The fog was getting thicker, turning the trees into gray shadows. Casey's breath came in short gasps. "Dad, what do we do?" Robert didn't answer. His chest was tightening, not panic, but real pain. Angina, the kind that meant his heart wasn't getting enough oxygen. His nitroglycerin pills were in the glove box of the Subaru, 6 miles away. Sweat soaked through his shirt despite the cool air. They hit a fork in the trail. Left, the main trail descending back toward Ivester Gap. Safety, the parking lot. But 3 miles of narrow trail with Pike behind them the whole way. Right, a spur trail leading deeper into Shining Rock wilderness, truly remote, but rough terrain, boulder fields, stream crossings, multiple routes, places to lose him. Robert hesitated. Pike's voice drifted through the fog behind them, calm and cold. "Don't even think about running, Robert." Robert froze. He'd never told Pike his last name. "I got your license plate. North Carolina tag, JDH 4793. I know you live at 428 Oakwood Drive in Asheville." Pike's boots crunched closer. "I know Casey goes to Virginia Tech. Saw the parking sticker on your Subaru." Casey's face went white. Pike had been at their car. He'd waited for them, planned this. Robert's voice dropped to a whisper, his lips barely moving. "When I say run, you take the spur trail. Don't stop. Don't look back." "Dad." "Don't argue." Casey's eyes flooded. He understood what his father was really saying. One of them might not make it out. Robert spun around and yelled, "What the hell do you want?" It was loud, aggressive. The first time he'd challenged Pike directly. Pike's face twisted into something ugly, and he closed the distance fast. The baton swung in a wide arc aimed at Robert's head. Robert ducked, barely. And the weapon cracked into a tree trunk behind him, splintering bark. "Run!" Robert screamed. Casey bolted up the spur trail, and Robert launched himself at Pike. 175 pounds of middle-aged shop teacher desperation colliding with 200 pounds of wiry muscle. They hit the mud hard, arms tangling, both of them grunting with the impact. It wasn't a movie fight. It was ugly, graceless. Robert wasn't a fighter. He was a guy who taught kids how to use a table saw and coached JV wrestling 15 years ago. His knees screamed, his shoulder popped. But he got one good punch in, shop teacher hands, knuckles hardened from years of woodwork, straight into Pike's jaw. Pike's head snapped back, then a knee slammed into Robert's ribs. All the air left his lungs in one sick wheeze. His vision grayed at the edges. Pike rolled on top of him, and hands, calloused, strong, wrapped around Robert's throat. Pressure. Darkness creeping in. Robert clawed at Pike's face, but his arms felt like they were moving through water. 40 yards up the spur trail, Casey stopped. He could hear it, the gasping, the wet choking sounds. Every instinct in his body screamed, "Run." Get to the ridgeline, get signal, get help. But the image locked in his brain. His dad lying on a trail alone, dying while Casey sprinted to safety like a coward. He turned around. There was a rock near his boot. Granite, softball-sized, edges sharp enough to cut. Casey grabbed it and ran back down the trail. Pike's thumbs were pressing into Robert's windpipe when Casey's shadow fell over them. Pike looked up. Casey swung. The rock connected with Pike's temple with a wet, sickening thunk. Not a clean movie knockout, but the sound of meat and bone giving way. Pike rolled off Robert, dazed, blood pouring from a gash above his ear. He wasn't unconscious, just hurt. His hand scrabbled for the baton in the mud. Go! Casey hauled his father up by the arm. They ran, full sprint, lungs burning. Robert's chest felt like someone was standing on it, real cardiac pain, sharp and radiating down his left arm, but adrenaline shoved it into the background. They hit the spur trail, veered off into a boulder field where the rhododendrons thinned out, and started scrambling uphill into the wild heart of Shining Rock wilderness. Behind them, Pike's voice echoed through the trees, slurred, furious, but still coming. I'll find you, I know these mountains. They climbed for 20 minutes. No trail, just instinct and terror, hands bleeding from grabbing rocks, boots slipping on wet moss. When they finally hit the ridgeline, Casey's phone flickered. 1 bar. His hands shook so badly he almost dropped it. He dialed 911. It connected. 911, what's your emergency? Casey's voice cracked. We're on the Art Loeb Trail near Shining Rock. A man attacked us. That's when Robert collapsed. His lips were blue. His left arm clutched to his chest. The nitroglycerin was 6 miles away in the glove box. And somewhere below them, Pike's voice still carried through the fog. You can't hide on my mountain. The helicopter found them 90 minutes later. Casey had stayed on the line with dispatch the entire time, his voice going hoarse as he described landmarks. The ridgeline, the boulder field, the gap in the trees where they were huddled. He'd taken off his jacket and draped it over his father, who was still conscious but gray-faced and sweating through his shirt. Robert kept whispering, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. Casey didn't know if he was apologizing for the heart attack or for Linda's ashes, still sitting in the mud back at Deep Gap. The Transylvania County Sheriff's Department sent a medical helicopter because the terrain was too rough for a ground extraction. When the basket dropped, 2 paramedics strapped Robert in and hauled him up like cargo while Casey climbed a separate line. From the air, Casey looked down at the wilderness below. Endless green, no trails visible, just forest stretching for miles in every direction. Pike could be anywhere down there. Robert survived, mild heart attack. They got him to Mission Hospital in Asheville within the hour, ran a stent through his blocked artery, and kept him for 3 days of observation. The sheriff's investigation moved fast. They found the blue sedan on the old Forest Service road, exactly where Casey said it would be. Stolen plates, fake registration. The interior had been wiped clean. No fingerprints, no DNA. The tarp in the back seat covered a duffel bag stuffed with cash, credit cards, and 2 other brass urns. Both urns were full of ashes. The deputy who briefed Robert in the hospital spoke quietly, like he was delivering news about a terminal diagnosis. We think you're the 3rd family he targeted this year, maybe more. We found records, missing persons reports, 2 other men who came up here alone to scatter ashes and never came back. 1 in March, 1 in January. Robert's stomach turned to ice. Who is he? The deputy pulled out a file. Inside was a booking photo from 3 years ago. The same face, same dead eyes, but cleaner, younger. Darren Kowalski, former Buncombe County deputy, fired for excessive force in 2021. Wanted in Tennessee for armed robbery. We think he's been living rough in the backcountry, preying on hikers. Probably thought the uniform would make people trust him. Have you found him? The deputy's jaw tightened. Not yet. We've got search teams combing Shining Rock, but it's 60,000 acres of wilderness. He knows the terrain. Could be in a dozen different counties by now. Robert closed his eyes. Pike was still out there. Casey didn't cry in the hospital. He didn't cry during the police interviews or the helicopter ride or the long drive home in a rental car because their Subaru was still impounded as evidence. He cried 2 weeks later. He was packing for summer semester, folding clothes into a duffel bag in his dorm room when he found it wedged under his bed. The urn, Linda's ashes, still sealed, still full. Casey sat on the floor holding it, and the memory hit him like a freight train. During the fight, when he'd grabbed the rock and run back to save his dad, he must have snatched the urn from the mud without realizing it. Some unconscious instinct to protect it. He never scattered the ashes. He never completed his mom's final wish. And sitting there on the scratched linoleum of his dorm room floor, Casey realized something. His mom would have been proud. Not that he spread her ashes at some remote mountain overlook, but that when it mattered, when the choice was between honoring a dead woman's wish and saving his living father, he chose his dad. That's not betrayal. That's survival. 6 months later, on a cold Saturday in November, Robert and Casey drove to Carrier Park in Asheville, a paved quarter-mile loop with picnic tables, dog walkers, and a playground where kids screamed on swings. They scattered Linda's ashes near a bench overlooking the French Broad River. No isolation, no risk, no wilderness, just the two of them together saying goodbye in a place where cell phones worked and help was 30 seconds away. Casey took a photo of his dad smiling, genuinely smiling, for the first time in over a year. In the background, the Blue Ridge Mountains loomed on the horizon, beautiful, infinite, indifferent. The following week, a day hiker reported a strange encounter on the Art Loeb Trail, a man in an old Forest Service uniform, asking questions, watching the trailhead. The Transylvania County Sheriff's Office sent a team to investigate. They found cigarette butts at Deep Gap, Marlboro Reds, freshly smoked. Pike, or whoever he really was still out there, still waiting, still hunting.